Hi doctor and everyone. So this is a video about human rights in Malaysia.
Human rights. What are human rights? Human rights are the fundamental freedoms and protections that belong to every single one of us, regardless of race, gender, sexuality, religion, or beliefs. Rights are about being treated and treating others fairly and ensuring everyone can make choices about their own lives. They're about justice, freedom, and equality. Federal Constitution and human rights. Primacy of the Constitution. A fundamental tenet of Malaysian law is the doctrine of the supremacy of the Constitution, which holds that the rule of law must always take precedence above the judgment, prerogative of individuals, due to the undeniable connections between freedom of religion, speech expression, association. In assembly, judges are required to interpret the law creatively and holistically in order to preserve constitutional supremacy and validity, despite the fact that judges' opinions on the supremacy of the Constitution are sharply divided due to the varied backgrounds and experience, education, and training they all received in Malaysia and abroad. Since rights are the offspring of the law, as legal positivists maintain, and since the executive and legislative branches must abide by the Constitution to prevent any ultra-vires, unconstitutionality, or illegality while carrying out the duties, as Hans Kelsen argued, they must all be cognizant of the fact that there is diversity everywhere. As a result, they have a duty to promote judicial independence and the separation of powers, so that the parliament is not supreme. B. Content. Malaysia's federal constitution guarantees the protection of fundamental human rights. These include the right to personal freedom and the outlawing of slavery and forced labor, acts and laws that either have a human rights component or relate to specific segments of society whose rights may be in danger of being infringed, contain legislative measures that are in place at the level to prevent human rights violations and abuses. In addition, the Constitution protects the freedoms of speech, religion, movement, and life. Relation to human rights. In Malaysia, human rights as outlined in the other are recognized as long as they are in accordance with Part 2, Article 5 to 13 of the Federal Constitution, which is referred to as fundamental liberties. Basic human rights norms are protected by Malaysia's federal constitution. These essential concepts, which are applicable to all people at all times, regardless of gender, nationality, color, religion, or culture, are universal. These were interconnected and related to one another in order to maintain social harmony and togetherness among Malaysia's various communities, groups, and faiths. These values shall not be neglected, given the diversity of the country's population. SUHAKAM and Fights for Human Rights in Malaysia Foundation. The Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, SUHAKAM, was established by Parliament under the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia Act 1999, Act 597, Power, Procedures and Implementation. The Act provides SUHAKAM with powers to enable it to discharge its functions effectively. Under Section 4(2), the Commission is empowered to undertake research by conducting programs, seminars, and workshops, and to disseminate and distribute the results. The Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Division supports the Commission in terms of advising and assisting the government in formulating policies, practice, and administrative procedures, particularly on issues relating to economic, social, and cultural rights. The recommendations and guidance shall be consistent with the international human rights standards. Examples of its past work include research and publication on the Report on Transgender Persons in Clael and Selenar 2019, Report on Care Services for Older Persons and Supporters, Fought for Caregivers 2015, The Right to Education for Children with Learning Disabilities, Focusing on Primary Education, Nation 2015, Strategic Framework on a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights for Malaysia 2015, and Report on Human Rights and Access to Equitable Healthcare 2011. The division's current work focuses on indigenous peoples, business and its impacts on human rights, transgender and statelessness. The division is working closely with the relevant ministry and our agency to identify and develop solutions to enable basic needs, including access to healthcare, education, and work for the vulnerable communities are met. Human rights NGO in Malaysia. Malaysia has several human rights NGOs that are working towards protecting and promoting human rights in the country. Some of the prominent human rights NGOs in Malaysia are Persatuan Promosi Hak Asasi Manusia, PROAM, Persatuan Promosi Hak Asasi Manusia FAM, is a human rights NGO in Malaysia that focuses on promoting and protecting human rights, particularly civil and political rights, as well as the rights of marginalized communities. FAM was established in 1999 and has since worked on a wide range of issues, including freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, gender equality, and migrant rights. FAM's activities include conducting research, providing legal aid to individuals who have faced human rights violations, organizing advocacy campaigns, in providing training and education to raise awareness about human rights issues. The organization also works closely with other human rights groups and civil society organizations in Malaysia to promote and protect human rights. Persatuan Kebangsaan Hak Asasi Manusia National Human Rights Society, HAKAM, or the National Human Rights Society, is a prominent human rights NGO in Malaysia that was founded in 1989. The organization focuses on promoting and protecting human rights, including civil and political rights, economic and social rights, and cultural rights. HAKAM's work is guided by the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights instruments. HAKAM's activities include advocacy, research, education, and legal aid. The organization advocates for policy and legal reforms to better protect human rights in Malaysia and works closely with other human rights NGOs and civil society organizations to promote human rights issues. HAKAM also provides legal aid to individuals who have faced human rights violations and has supported cases related to issues such as freedom of expression, police brutality, and the rights of refugees and migrants. Suka Society, also known as Persatuan Kebajikan dan Pembangunan Masyarakat Malaysia, is a non-profit organization in Malaysia that focuses on promoting and protecting the rights of children and marginalized communities. The organization was founded in 2008 and operates in various regions of Malaysia. Suka Society's work is guided by the principles of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, UNCRC, and other international human rights instruments. The organization's activities include advocacy, education, and community development programs aimed at promoting child rights, protecting vulnerable children from abuse and exploitation, and supporting marginalized communities. Mikase Foundation is a non-profit organization in Malaysia that works to alleviate poverty and promote social development. While Mikase's work is not solely focused on human rights issues, the organization's programs and activities do have important implications for human rights in Malaysia. Mikase's primary program is a food aid and cashless payment system that provides assistance to low-income families and individuals. Through this program, Mikase partners with retailers to distribute food aid to families in need and provides a cashless payment system. Amnesty International, also referred to as Amnesty or AI, is an international non-governmental organization focused on human rights, with its headquarters in the United Kingdom. In Malaysia, authorities use repressive laws to restrict freedom of expression, and peaceful protests were prevented, and protest organizers prosecuted. There are some issues on human rights in Malaysia that be reported by Amnesty International. 1. Freedom of expression. 2. Freedom of assembly. 3. Refugees and migrants' rights for torture and other ill treatment. 5. LGBTI people's rights. 6. Indigenous people's rights. Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch HRW is an international non-governmental organization headquartered in New York City that conducts research and advocacy on human rights. In Malaysia, they faced political instability because the Malaysian government resorted to heavy-handed tactics, investigating and arbitrarily arresting those critical of the government and its policies, pursuing a hardline anti-migrant policy, and threatening enhanced action against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBT people. There are issues on human rights that be reported by Human Rights Watch. 1. Attacks on human rights defenders. 2. Freedom of media. 3. Police abuse and impunity. 4. Refugees, asylum seekers, and trafficking victims. 5. Freedom of religion. 6. Criminal justice. 7. Sexual orientation and gender identity. Solving the conflict of federal constitution and other in relation to human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, other and the federal constitution of a country can sometimes come into conflict when it comes to protecting and upholding human rights. First step in addressing this conflict is to understand the relationship between the other and the federal constitution. In most cases, the federal constitution of a country will incorporate and protect the human rights outlined in the other. One approach is to interpret the federal constitution in a way that is consistent with the principles of the other. Another approach is to use international law and human rights treaties to guide the interpretation of the federal constitution. Ultimately, the key to resolving conflicts between the federal constitution and the other in relation to human rights is to prioritize the protection of human rights. This may require a careful and nuanced approach that takes into account the specific legal and cultural context. In conclusion, protecting and promoting human rights are indispensable to all walks of life. All in all, despite their status, everyone should have equal access to basic rights. Furtherance, unjust and obsolete laws should be reviewed and amended accordingly or abolished completely instead. These laws should be replaced by compatible laws that comply with international human rights principles and the Malaysian Federal Constitution. The protection of basic human rights is enshrined in the Constitution of Malaysia. These include liberty of the person and prohibition of slavery and forced labor. Human rights groups, such as non-governmental organizations, NGOs, are generally critical of the Malaysian government and the Royal Malaysia Police. It is because there are issues in Malaysia that do not protect our human rights. Preventive detention laws, such as the Internal Security Act and the Emergency Public Order and Prevention of Crime Ordinance 1969, allow for detention without trial or charge, and as such, are a source of concern for human rights organizations like Suara Rakyat Malaysia. But the government has actively focused on human rights reforms to address the inequalities, discrimination, and oppression that lead to vulnerable groups. A human rights-centered approach includes respect for freedom of expression, abolition of the death penalty and issues, protection of refugee rights and religious freedom,